Curator and moderator, architect Smaran Mallesh from Cadence Architects.
There are lots of artists and creative people who look up in history to canonical ideas that they didn't pursue in their art, and that is something that he wanted to discuss and kind of talk about.
Architect Sudipto Ghosh from Ghosh Associates.
It is one of my favorite. I've drawn it, sketched it, analyzed it, theorized it. But every time I'm there just beyond the ramp and the brise-soleil, I'm confronted by a space that I can never get to the bottom of.
Architect Verendra Wakhloo from Matra Architects.
Of course, these are all canons. Now, canon is very often here and confession is here. That's what I feel. Now, occasionally, it happens this way, that confessions are there, they become so powerful.
Architect Madhav Raman from Anagram Architects.
Architecture is a civilizational act. It is an act in which, on which civilizations are founded. It's an act on which we are creating habitation. So in many ways, that's kind of a core essential to our humanity.
Art is something that's always inspired me. I think art is full of canonical ideologies that I look up to. And, in this idea of kind of following art and finding new artists, there was an artist called Alvaro Barrington that I ran into. And what was really interesting about Alvaro is that he did this little exhibition in 2019 called Artists I Steal From. And this UK-based architect, what he figured was that there are lots of artists and creative people who look up in history to canonical ideas that they didn't pursue in their art. And that is something that he wanted to discuss and kind of talk about. So basically, this exhibition was curated where there was Alvaro Barrington, and then he picked 49 other artists, people like Ellsworth Kelly to a lot of younger people who he kind of connected with, who he thought his work had a conversation with, who he thought, had canonical ideas that he could pursue and sort of have a network in place. So he had one painting in the exhibition, which was his, and along with that, he had 49 other works. And what was really interesting for an onlooker or a guy who goes to the exhibition was that they would look at the work of these 49 artists through the eyes of Alvaro Barrington. And it was a very interesting sort of environment that was created, which really spoke about influences that kind of cut across time, cut across space, and there was a dialogue that was in place between him and all the artists on display. So this was Alvaro Barrington and how he looked at canonical ideas in art. And of course, art has influenced other art forms. This is art in film, this is art in fashion, and even art and food. That's a Kandinsky in the center, and there's a salad that's done like that, So the idea really was to see how architectural practices look at canons. Do canons exist for architectural practices? What are these canons? Are they archetypes in the sense that there are pure ideological thought processes that were in place that we then look at, and through our sensibilities, we redeploy them in different ways, we appropriate them in different ways, or is that a challenge really? So I'm really excited to have architects here whose work I really respect. I've followed them for a number of years now, and it'll be fantastic to spawn out these ideas about canons, archetypes, and do they really matter in today's times. Thank you. So the format really is that each one of the panelists will make a short presentation, and then we'll have a panel discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I assume there are many young architects here and many young aspiring architects. And what we saw in the last three presentations it has been to me very overwhelming. And I think it must be overwhelming to the audience as much. Because you see work that has happened over decades in half an hour, in 1 hour. And I think it gives a very wrong impression. It almost can be stressful if you see this kind of work within an hour. That's what I feel personally. And here, since it's about confession, I'm using this little power that I'm getting to confess without being stoned or thrown tomatoes at. So, first of all, let me share that. But let me thank Smaran for narrowing down the entire framework of our presentation to, first of all, 10 to 15 minutes. It started with 5 minutes, but we are allowed to speak a little more because one contributor, one panelist is missing today. She's unfortunately not here. See, I've consumed already 3 minutes. See, my age allows me to take more time, a little more than others. And if I overshoot it, just cover your watches. It works very well. Now, canon and confessions. Very often we see canon here, traditionally in medieval times. It could be the canon of the Roman Catholic Church. It could be the canon of any other religious institution. It could have been a canon of any emperor. So we have, it could be the canon of the Bauhaus. Of course, these are all canons. Now, canon is very often here, and confession is here. That's what I feel. Now, occasionally, it happens this way, that confessions are there, they become so powerful, like, to give you a kind of metaphor, if I may do that in this crowd, is that Jesus Christ is actually a confession against a canon. But the canon doesn't permit Christ to confess in the fullest way. I think historically, that's one of the most significant historical events. So confession leads to crisis. And I think in most of the time, confession is when you are scared. So you go into this little chamber in the church, you confess very personally, very privately. An audience doesn't normally come to know of a confession. But therefore, I would say, to use Gottfried Böhm, who is a German architect of post-war, and who is one of the early Pritzker laureates, he says something very beautiful. Take your time to read it. So I would say, I'm taking his writing to somehow overthrow this idea of confession in my presentation. I will not use confession as the title. I am thinking it is about realization. So confession has fear, realization has freedom. It is an opportunity to realize while you are in the passage of your work, while you are experiencing the work, what is very important for you? What is your guiding torch? So I think 3 areas so far, I could bring it down to 3 areas because of time limitations. Context, synthesis, and art and architecture. I did a small mistake. I should have also involved craft. I think art, craft, and architecture. The context is not understood for me as a generic idea of a site or of a culture or of something that is significant visually. But for me, it is a context of transformation, which happens then through the process of creating knowledge. I think the hunger a general human being would have, and the Homo sapien has, is hunger for knowledge. And I think this hunger for knowledge is gradually disappearing or becoming little narrow, because there is hunger for money, there is hunger for fame, there is hunger for entertainment. There could be various hungers that we exhibited in our work and in our search for deepening ourselves and our transformation. So I feel for myself, it is more about knowledge in the work which we are doing. To bring ourselves to this place again, I have put here a picture of the Indian Art Fair that happened a few years back and happens regularly every year. And you see the typical map of the halls that happen regularly, 3 halls, and all are nicely rectangular. And if I look at the way that you explore this hall is on a certain grid. The grid itself is established by the curators who put then the art in a grid system. But now I personally feel that the grid represents a very strong intellectual framework. It represents a framework that's driven by purely mind. I call it masculine. I may take that liberty to do so. Fortunately, if I would be on the other side of the fence, things would look differently, but I can do that here. And it is a contracted consciousness. I feel the consciousness is limited to an inorganic monologue approach. If I suddenly look what the reality looks like, so I enter the first dot on the bottom side, I get a phone call, which happens regularly. I'm very sure everybody is receiving, or many are receiving a phone call right now, or a message. What happens that I get a phone call from one of my clients who is point 2, second dot. She is at the Delhi Art and Craft Council with her friend exhibiting some art. So I take the liberty to cut across and loiter instead of following the grid. At her place, I meet another gentleman who is into making kitchens and all. So he's a vendor, and he takes me to the point 3 because his friend is also exhibiting, or he's liked something there. From point 3, we go to another artist, Veer Munshi, who is exhibiting there also some of his art, and thereafter we take a break, go to CMYK, that's the 6th point, to see some of the books, and finally we are hungry and we go to point 7, 8. Now you see what is happening here. There is a dialogue. There is a dialogue that is generated not through the mind, but through forces that are unforeseeable. I feel the mind works like that. The mind works if it is open, and I call it therefore feminine, because there is something that happens in a dialogue. And I feel there's something that happens to a body. The mind excludes the body, and I would like to drive the entire exploration of architecture to body as much. I think lately body, and I think in future with the AI, the body would take more importance than it had, because the AI can substitute a lot of mind work. I think there was a presentation by Matra Architects yesterday or this morning. I missed that sadly. But I see the possibility that our significance as human species would become more important in future when we engage ourselves with our bodies also. Dancers know how to do it, musicians know how to do it, but as architects, we are very, very controlled and very limited. I'm showing here a little sketch that is created through a dialogue with one of my teammates. He's narrating how his family grows. He's narrating how, with the growth, spaces vertically as well horizontally expand in the piece of land with set of courtyards and so on and so forth. I don't want to go deeper into this, but you see out of the dialogue is an archetype that is being explored. A type becomes generic for many more types to further evolve. Now, on hand of this beautiful cup that I got as a memento about 20 odd years ago, I want to demonstrate something which is very dear to me, the synthesis actually of all these thoughts. Of course, it is substantiated by the intellectual framework. We have, as we heard Professor Hanif, about structure, material, and the construction. Of course, we can't ignore that. But what is beautiful about this cup is are these three components. As you see, distinctly, you see the plate, unusual in its thickness. Then you see the cup, and then the knob. Now, this piece of cup is from Japan. Now, let me unfold this narrative. So the cup has, as you distinctly see, a chamfer, which allows your hand to slide below it. So to balance this motion, you have a little trench around it where you put your thumb. So you are easily holding the cup. The cup is made, by the way, out of timber, out of a very specific timber in Japan, lacquered in this red color, and the base is in black. We'll see in the next few slides. And interestingly, the knob, as against the general conventional handle does something very special to your body, to your hands, and to your mind, and to the time that you spend with this cup of tea. You splice your fingers, hug actually the cup of tea, and sense the temperature of the tea. You feel it. And with this motion, you are hugging the piece of cup or this cup and the tea. And since it has to be brought to your lips, the way it is constructed in plan, you see where the knob is fixed, the body of the wood is little thicker. Where you sip the tea is the opposite side, where the whole edge is thinner. So, and it is also through this golden color emphasized. So what you can see with the thinness is, functionally, of course, it has to work. You sip and then the tea doesn't, you don't drip the tea and so on and so forth. Now let us see a little more how it gets dismantled. So there are these two components. You can clean it easily. It locks nicely. And those things further get specified by the color rendering of this cup of tea. Let me take this further then into some slides. I have limited myself to really very few slides, as I was told not to. I'm repeating, but not to extend it further to large exploration of our works. Not needed right now, but what I find very interesting, inspired by the cup, is how do you relate the object to the subject, and vice versa. I call this engagement in architecture, hence, and the eye, the architecture, and the interior. Now, mostly we are not engaged to do the interiors. The interiors are being done by interior designers. Especially for the kind of buildings we do, we are mostly engaged with building residences, and not really large projects that we saw earlier. Now, while looking at this picture and the building, what I realized is that you have an internal space, because we know where the sofa is the internal space. You have a sheet of glass in between, and then you have the building outside. I could be seeing it the other way. I could be seeing that the building is inside while you are sitting outside on a terrace or a balcony, and what separates it is actually the glass, the piece of glass. I think the idea of architecture could be that you have this ambivalency created where the outside and the inside are not distinct two different things. That you have the experience through the spaces of both of it simultaneously, as if you are one with the building. Because unlike the cup example, you are not able to get the same tactility or the same closeness. After all, buildings are much larger than that cup, and buildings are much more complex. But we can try and attempt at least this relationship between the building and the body. This is a picture of another building in Udaipur, the Lake House, which tries to do with very frugal and very simplistic means this kind of engagement. Another building in Delhi, which through the extension of the building to inclusion of your viewpoints, goes beyond creating, as nicely written by Katsuaki, it goes beyond framing only as a picture frame into the city, into your neighborhood, but it starts dissolving the frame and integrating the architecture into your interior. Last project that I want to put, which is put up there also outside on a panel, again in Delhi. As I was traveling, I was this year in August at the exhibition of Norm Foster's work in Paris. After the exhibition, and we spent few hours on the exhibition, we loitered around Pompidou Center, and the exhibition was at the Pompidou Center in Paris. We loitered a bit around and found that beautiful little building by Renzo Piano, adjacent to the Pompidou Center, which had paintings by Brancusi. I'll come later to that. Interestingly, three of us, all architects, went and planned the entire day for Norm Foster's work, but we spent just 1 hour to see the work. We almost dashed through the project. his set of projects and the exhibition, while Brancusi's work, which was maybe something like 2,000 square feet large, not even that probably, engaged us nearly for 3 hours. It set me think how come that a small exhibition, an art exhibition from the 20s, was so potent and powerful that we spent so much of time. It made me think also how come that we didn't engage with Norm Foster's work more deeply. Interesting part is that the cave painting in Lascaux or other paintings in Lascaux were dealing with architecture, which was or space. You can name it place also. It doesn't make much difference in my opinion. It was dealing with your habitation, which was very primordial, just the cave, and the art was expressed through just your body. The hands, the handprints, drawings, and so on and so forth. This tradition of integrating architecture and art went, like you see it, the Kailash temple, which is a marvel of architecture. You can see how art and architecture were, in that period, one. They were symbiotic. And as we went through the history, and interestingly, it is across the world, you see here Mies van der Rohe in Chicago. Now, if I remove Calder's sculpture, that red sculpture, from this place, you will not find your place. You will not know, unless you have a GPS, you will not find this place. Because the repetition of the modernism, the way the body was isolated, the way it was rejected, it actually disoriented us strongly. There has been a lot of critique. I don't want to dwell. It's just to put a little flag on this here. Now, if you go further into today's time, this is Norm Foster's exhibition in Pompidou Center. It still belongs to some extent. Now, in this case, because the assembling of building has been so powerful and so intricate, you could say almost decorative, and in the urban context so well placed, there is no art left outside. Maybe a hint that architecture can become art. Now, this is the exhibition of Brancusi that set me thinking, and I'll show you 2 pictures about his art, and end with this little conclusion, summarizing my own thoughts, that maybe to escape the consumption of buildings and see buildings only mere as consumption, I realized that you have to tread into art, craft, and architecture and fuse it together as one entity. Thank you so much.
I'm going to jump right in, but those are beautiful thoughts, and I don't know if you'll have time to speak about some of those later, but I don't have a presentation. I'm just going to talk on the topic. I think the topic is very, very interesting. I'm particularly intrigued by the word confession. We confess to a crime, an indiscretion, a transgression. What is that in this case, right? Why are we being asked to confess? So we are being asked to confess to our influences, to our inspirations, particularly if they are other architectural works by other architects. It's perfectly fine to be influenced by an anthill or a seashell, but we need to confess because we harbor a guilt of stealing, of borrowing without permission, of being inauthentic because that original thought did not arise within us, of not being original or not being a genius who is the wellspring of original ideas. Of course, one way to defend oneself is to argue that there is no original idea, that nothing exists in a vacuum. Even a genius had parents, grew up in a community. How can their ideas be without influences? That's a valid line of argument, but I'm going to go another way. I'm going to probe why this idea of an original thought is problematic at another level. The word canon, to me, stands for an original thought that has now been raised to the level of a gold standard against which everything will now be judged. The origin of an idea is that singular moment when something found voice for the first time. The voice was distinguished, and differentiated the first time a voice rose above other voices from the hum of other sounds. History is a chronicle of such singular voices. It is written to highlight individuals, their glories, victories, this king, that general. Our languages have been refined to tell their tales, spotlighting them with adjectives, picking them out through a differentiation of gender, nationality, race, color, creed, picking out the heroes, individuals with superpowers out to perform actions and deeds that become canons. A large part of our education in schools and colleges is spent on this because it is out of these canons that we weave the tapestry of our self-worth, of our own identities. Our identities, let's think about this for a moment. As children, we crawl around, putting things in our mouths, looking at our hands, touching our cheeks, sucking our thumbs. We have no sense of identity at this stage. And then a time comes when psychologists call the mirror stage, when you are able to identify yourself in the mirror and point and then say your name, perhaps. At this point in your life, you are standing and even stumbling around in the room. You bang your knee on the corner of the coffee table and start wailing. Your mother comes and slaps the table and says, "Bad table." Your eyes widen and you stop crying. You have just realized that the table is different from your body, that you have a body which you have to protect. That is identity formation. It is very important because the body has to be protected at all costs, from the elements, from pain, from shock, from predators, from disease. Identity is a threat response. I'll say that one more time. Identity is a threat response. Any sort of identity, communal identity, national identity, racial identity. It's a response from a threat from outside. Even branding identity is an act to overcome the threat from being confused with another. And we are constantly reinforcing our identities through our names, titles, CVs, discussions and award ceremonies, introductions in these discussions, through selfies and social media updates. It is all a threat response, a threat and insecurity that you will dissolve into the mists of oblivion like tears in the rain. Every time I go to Ahmedabad, I try and visit the mill owners building by Corbusier. It is one of my favorite. I've drawn it, sketched it, analyzed it, theorized it. But every time I'm there, just beyond the ramp and the brise-soleil, I'm confronted by a space that I can never get to the bottom of. It is beyond what my rational brain can come up with. The feeling resonates inside me like a memory of something ancient that my body remembers from a different lifetime. I lose myself to that space. My body becomes one with that space. I have to say, if I considered myself to be an equal of Corbusier, perhaps, I would not be able to let go that easily. I would still be in that analytical, critical mode, a threat response, doubtless. But just think of that moment of beauty you have when you have lost yourself too. It doesn't have to be an architectural space, a musical performance, an art gallery. It doesn't have to be that. It could be listening to your grandmother telling you stories, or going out with your friends, or trekking in the mountains. These are moments where you have forgotten your bodies, forgotten your identities, what we call in Hindi, magna hona. Beauty and identity are antithetical. They cannot coexist. Beauty flees when identity kicks in, when you are under threat, at the point where you need to protect your bodies. If you're being chased by a tiger, are you going to look over your shoulder and say, "What a beautiful animal"? Are you? The beautiful animal is no longer beautiful. Beauty does not lie in the object. Beauty is something that happens to you. It is a profound moment when you lose sense of yourself, when you and the world are not separate. It is a sense of oneness, not of individuation and differentiation, of looking for uniqueness and heroic genius, but of oneness where nothing is different from anything else. At this point, the thought of our uniqueness, of our originality, of our authenticity, of our morality, all of this withdraws and disappears. As architects and artists, we consider the purpose of our lives to be the author of beauty. This is rather silly in view of the idea that beauty does not reside in the object. You can, however, be a facilitator to the experience of beauty, to go past the layers of identity of the people and reach out to a memory that resides under those layers, to actually pull the rug from under their feet, to dissolving them into this ocean of beauty which is the world around us. The problem with architects is that we are chasing beauty with our personas intact and our egos inflated. And in our trail, we leave behind not people who have experienced beauty, but followers and likers and thumbs-uppers. In a quest for originality and recognition of genius, we have forgotten that if we ourselves are not open to beauty, what hope do we have of showing others a beautiful world? I'm amused at how people at award ceremonies say they are humbled by receiving an award. How have they been humbled? By being there at the award ceremony all decked up, they have just reinforced their identities. Now see this. Right here, I was judgy. It is a threat response. To talk of canons and confessions, to have standards to uphold to declare guilt and demand confessions is all very judgy. I confess to all influences. In fact, I would like to nothing more than to live life under influence. We don't have to chug down bottles of cough syrup for that. There is enough beauty out there in the world for that. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Sudipto. I think that's going to be tough to take you through my presentation after that truly thought-provoking talk, really. Well, my approach to this has been a little more straightforward, perhaps a little more irreverent. You know, when I started learning architecture, there were already masters and I guess the correct word is an aperture or quotes that are used to reinforce these canons. Canons are perhaps representations of revealed truth. So I'll start with the person whom I felt when I was in college was quite canonical, not in a reverential way, but in a completely irreverential way. For a person who had not really seen a very tall building, who had not really seen too much glass and steel and aluminum, I thought he had an awful lot to do with me learning architecture. So the thing is, as I will show you, a fair bit of our work involves brick. And you know the famous Khan quote about the brick wanting to be something. But I found that before Khan, Mies had spoken quite eloquently, or as eloquently as I believe he was a very gruff man, very blunt. So when he spoke to the New York Herald Tribune, which is a tribute to how canonical they thought he would be, architecture starts when you carefully put two bricks together. Now, I'm sure when Mies thought about it, he was putting two bricks together in his head. But in many ways, architecture is a civilizational act. It is an act on which civilizations are founded. It's an act on which we are creating habitation. So in many ways, that's kind of a core essential to our humanity. We have, as I said, explored masonry and brick in multiple projects, smaller, larger scales. And the idea that a brick wants to be something is not as apparent to me as is a brick mason wants to be something. We are currently trying to explore this idea of what lies between a corbelled masonry pattern in brick and an arched masonry pattern in brick. And there's nothing that was taught to me that would equip me on this journey as much as how I see brick walls being put together carefully, physically, not in my head, but in front of me. Mies inspired another very famous person, Ayn Rand. I think many of us, there's like architect, fountainhead, architect. Apparently, Ayn based her character on Mies. So there's this whole Jesus Christ complex that most architects have, that we are here, we are messianic, we are here to rescue the world, but the world doesn't understand us, and so forgive them, Father, for they know not that they are what they are doing. So that's a confession. So she had written a book called For the New Intellectual in the early 60s. And in it, there is this passage that she starts off on, which is civilization is the progress towards a society of privacy. And I found that very interesting because here, when I started practice in the projects that we've done, privacy is not necessarily public antithesis. Privacy is not necessarily an extroverted gesture. Our most intimate negotiations on privacy actually happen in our homes. So what started out as a concept house we call Interstice, which we did for Wallpaper magazine way back in 2010, where we wanted to share with the Occidental, for the Occidental eye or the experience, what it meant to live in India in this sort of inside-out way of living, where our most intimate moments are actually very public. And the sense of a home is actually how private are you from your parent or how private are you from your sibling. This is because we live in multi-generation houses. I've also had the opportunity to negotiate what it means to build with negotiable privacy in a very, very unsettled peri-urban space like Greater Noida, where safety is equated to privacy. We've also had the chance to design a home for a multi-generational family that is very conservative, but wanted to appear to be very global or very liberal. And these are negotiations that play out in our work. Moving on from one really great thinker to another, Jane Jacobs. We all know of her work and how a non-architect, non-planner, non-urbanist, philosopher, journalist, thinker, author has had such a huge impact on how we think about our cities today. So the book is The Death and Life of the Great American Cities. A city cannot be a work of art. And this, I think, today, when we are in this globe of competing cities and global cities and wanting to be the best in this random competition between settlements, really. I mean, sometimes it boggles the mind how much of a fetish it's become. A city cannot be a work of art means, I think I take that to mean that a work of art is an artist's view on how things should be. And it's not really arguable, it's not negotiable, it's not debatable. It is. We need artists to tell us that because they hold a mirror to us when they are brutally honest with us. But a city's brutality cannot be equated to honesty. This is not a 3-project slide. There's a very specific project called Project Samman that we began in 2012, working with the Municipal Corporation of Bhubaneswar and Cuttack in order to improve the quality of sanitation facilities for informal settlements. And these toilets, as they eventually became known, or basically that was the government typology that they were replacing, were essentially my own journey in trying to understand how important, and I know this sounds again irreverential, a good shit is. How it is actually a birthright. It is impossibly unfair that very few of us actually have this privilege of having a dignified private moment at the beginning of the day. We realize that toilets, as we imagine them, are very different based on where we are in society. We realize that toilets are a time-saving space. We realize toilets are a space where gender is negotiated very differently at different times of the day. And it required us to completely rethink how an Indian community toilet would work. There are 120 toilets, out of which 97 have been built. We developed 12 prototypes that were based on a completely different way of looking at what we call defecation behavior and ablution behavior. This was a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, so we needed to kind of jargonize what we were doing. But the essentiality of light, privacy, community, feeling safety in numbers, and also being able to inculcate hygienic sanitary behavior, like washing your hands after urinating, not urinating in public. These were questions that these toilets sought to answer. I'll end with someone closer to to my time, but still very much while I was in college. The future of architecture is not architectural. This is Jean Nouvel in one of his high-flying interviews to the Architectural Review. Jean is a Frenchman. Frenchmen are not known they're known to be very fluid with their language. So I don't know perhaps what Jean Nouvel himself thought when he was saying this. But what I've realized is that the idea of architecture as we are taught it and as we practice it is based on a fundamental flaw. It's based on the idea that architecture is permanent. We consume new materials and we design buildings and we occupy them and we sell them and buy them and demolish them. Basis and understanding that something has to be built that will stand the test of time. I believe architecture is absolutely about impermanence. So these are 3 projects that we've done. One was the pavilion for the Biennale at Kochi called Koodaram, where it was designed for disassembly. So every piece of metal, every piece of paver, every foundational element was designed to be dismantled and reused. In that project, we realized that actually the argument lies in this argument between industrially produced material and crafted material. We realized this again when we had to do a pop-up for a festival here in Delhi, the Food Lab. And this was basically a terrain we had to create, which we created out of completely reusable. When we borrowed pallet boxes from Azadpur Sabzi Mandi in order to build this set. And the idea was that to create a stage where both cooks, home cooks, chefs, and lay people could exchange stories about memories from their childhood about food, and to be conscious about this idea of producing and eating food and creating waste simultaneously. This thinking ultimately culminated in our project called Perch, which is a pretty famous restaurant here in Delhi, which was actually built out of the debris that came out of the restaurant that occupied the same previously, which was this restaurant called Pure Punjab. So a lot of the wood you see is actually ripped out from the plywood that we saw in the restaurant. There's a community table that's become a bit of an icon for the restaurant. I just want you guys to know that it was made out of packing logs that we got from the Maruti factory in Gurgaon. And those were logs of wood, serious, solid logs of wood that were used to pack Maruti cars to be shipped in. And after they were shipped, these logs were just chucked. So that's it. So I'll just end with my take. Like I said, masonry is a civilizational act. A home is negotiated privacy. A city is only as good as its worst dump. And the future of architecture is impermanence. Thank you.
It was incredible how all of you kind of looked at this topic in your own way, and it's very difficult to kind of thread them together in a way, but from what I could understand, I think there are a couple of things that I want to discuss, also, paucity of time. Do you think this response, especially this generation that is sitting here, it sort of is very clear that central to everything that you guys spoke about is this idea of, it's very human-centric, and it's about the body and architecture almost in a sort of a phenomenological way, So is that sort of a response to the future, which we know is going to be AI, that is artificial, or so this sense of it wanting to be more haptic, more real, more cerebral in a way, is that something that is consciously seeping into the way you guys made your presentations today? That is number one. That is, I want your thoughts on this. The second thing I wanted to know is this idea of a canon, which Sudipto rightly said seems like a gold standard. Again, is something that our generation was bestowed on us, and that was how we were taught. But do you think with the way social media operates today, where there is so much information that's bombarded, and a young mind doesn't necessarily have the right critical filter to separate or sieve these things, do you think then that there is a place and role for a canon in a certain sense, so that they can differentiate and they can sort of organize all this information and really figure out what is important and what is not? Because sometimes it becomes really difficult. So there are two parts to what I asked, and it'll be great to know all your opinions on this.
Look, I'll tell you very personally. I was growing up well before liberalization. So the way I look at the internet and the way I look at what, in hindsight, what liberalization has done to architecture is much the same. We view it kind of as a problem of excess. In many ways, that is also perhaps almost definitely one of the major factors behind climate crisis. Now, a lot of what I personally find elegant or good or canonical in that sense, that like blessed, in architecture, personally, this is just me, is often elegance in a certain frugality, which is not minimalism. It's a frugality that does not clobber the intellect, that does not stress someone out. It's just elegant and nuanced. In many ways, it's eschewed this threat perception of identity, these clothes we wear on our buildings, or the positions we take on platforms, right? So when I look at AI, I think the first threat perception that I don't think I'm guilty of, or it doesn't affect me, is that I do not see it as a threat to me at all. I'm actually I'm a techno geek. I love new technology intellectually. I don't like gadgets. I think, again, that's what I'm saying, that I don't like that excessiveness, the infinite swiping. These things bore me. They blur for me. So I feel for me, AI is a jolly green friendly giant. I don't see it because I see in many ways perhaps AI as a work of art, even though right now it's at its infancy, so it's perhaps just mimicking us, but AI as a work of art has that ability to be that absolutely brutally honest mirror that we hold ourselves up to. It's already begun. We've already started understanding trust and truth through the lens of AI. Things that we would have normally given to a master like Mies and said, you have understood everything, you tell us what to do. That trust has gone. We don't trust. So that's my response.
See, I felt I was very touched by what Sudipto said, I must admit, when he spoke about that beauty and beauty cannot be achieved if you have identity. I find that very provocative. I find it extremely provocative because it's hinting at a direction where the dual approach, the dualism that we know at the philosophical level across, especially the Western world, the duality that we live in between, and you can play the duality through and through. You have that body, mind, you have the feminine, the masculine. We know that from our civilization, that the duality at the philosophical level in, say, in Shaivism, in Kashmiri Shaivism, now in Tantric meditation, has to be overcome. Only then is beauty perceived. I understood actually Sudipto's proposition like that. I have few animals at home, and I must tell you, I feel they are not even aware of themselves. So a lack of awareness somehow makes these animals that we have very beautiful for us. There is an effortlessness that is exhibited by ignorance. Now, ignorance and canon seem not to be getting along with each other. So, since human beings have been equipped with the mind and the power of the mind, and we are a very special breed on the planet, and therefore I feel all the discussions around sustainability sometimes very questionable. I would look away. If somebody asks me, is your building sustainable? I don't think anything that human beings are doing is sustainable. It's a paradox there because you are not sustaining anything. You're all the time changing and destroying. And we have a very good simile with Shiva and who is the other one? Vishnu, I guess. One of these, one is preserver, the other is destroyer. I mean, in the earlier days, they have understood humans always destroy. Per se, there is absolutely no escape from that. But where I see a chance is that if the idea of time, the idea that we can produce very fast with our means that we have today, AI is, and I was talking to Manish Gulati right now, he said, we are saving so much of time now with the 3D printing and with all that what we are doing, with our knowledge that we have gained over 100,000 of years, we are very quick now to do. I feel personally that we should take more time in that what we are doing. We should not be in a rush. As a young man, you are always in a rush, and I sometimes feel that's my another pop-off idea. What if, as human beings, we were born old and we would grow young? You will be surprised the product that would be created in architecture would be very different. Your sensibilities and your sensitivity would change towards your reality. As against when you're young. When you're young, there is this force of proving the ambition, which is very natural, very important. I'm not denying that. But there is this urge, I have to do, I have to show, I have to get my awards. I fully agree there. So a kind of validation of ourselves, which is against the idea of the uniformity, the non-dual approach, which religions have taught, some of them. I think that is the key for future. I think AI is fine, but let us redefine time, because we get now more time. Our relevancy in future lies in my opinion, to recognize what we have as human beings, our specialness about human beings, and not by surrendering to the AI as a tool, as a very strong tool.
I know time's up, so one line, I think what you said, focus on what is important. AI has proved that our minds are not, we are not as clever as we thought we were. And so let the machines do the work that needs to be done, but let's focus on slowing down, thinking about what is important.
Universal basic income would be useful. I said universal basic income would be useful for that.
Thanks so much, guys. Thank you.